Hey, Stacey David here, and this is the Tales of a Gearhead podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Cornwall Tools, the choice of professionals since 1919. That's right, over 100 years building tools and still going strong. If you need tools, check them out. You won't be disappointed. All right, let's get rolling. Well, I don't know what you guys did for your weekend, but for my weekend, I went to an auto auction. Now, this was not a big Mecum or Barrett-Jackson, one of those big auctions. This was just a little local auction. It was about 10 cars. And this was a guy's collection that was being sold. He had passed away probably 15 years ago, and the collection has just sat. And then his wife passed away a couple years ago, and they were settling the estate. So keep in mind, none of these vehicles had run for at least 15 years, and then some of them had been sitting before that. First of all, I was shocked at the prices that some of these things brought. The flagship car was a 68 Shelby GT500 KR convertible. And if you guys are familiar with the Shelby Mustangs, that's pretty much the holy grail when it comes to it. You know, and this was a car that had had kind of a bad restoration done or a cheap restoration done back in the 90s, you know, with kind of a cheap repaint. You know, it was all needing to be redone again, but the car hadn't run in, gosh, probably 25 years. Brakes are locked up, motor was, you know, probably locked up. But it was the real deal, and it had the documentation on it, but that thing brought $170,000, which is crazy because, I mean, you can find one running at that kind of price right now with the way the market is. And of course, the market's volatile. It moves around. So, you know, there was a time those cars were bringing, you know, really crazy money, you know, $300,000-$400,000. But one of the things that kind of caught my eye, and that is something that I want to kind of bring up to you guys and kind of warn you about, is the speculation that happens with these cars and how you have to beware of that. For example, one of the cars that was selling was a 66 convertible Mustang. It was a K-code, which was the Hypo 289. It was a factory GT. So it was a nice car. I mean, this is a high-dollar car as far as just a regular Mustang goes. But right there in the ad, it said, rumor has it that Lee Iacocca himself drove this car. And then it says, but we have no documentation of that. So my question is, why say it? If you can't document it, then it's just hearsay. And what these guys do is they try to make it more desirable as a selling technique. Now, you might think, well, what's the harm in that? Well, the harm is that whoever buys that, they're going to say, it won't be, we think Lee Iacocca used to drive this, or we heard there was hearsay that he did. They'll leave that first part off, and eventually it'll become Lee Iacocca drove this car. Then it'll be, this was Lee Iacocca's car. Then it will be, this was the very first Mustang that Lee Iacocca ever designed. And then all of a sudden, you know, you've got this huge lie that goes with this car with no documentation on it. And it drives the price up. So pretty soon, somebody is going to buy that car, and they're going to go to Kevin Marty or whoever, and they have a Marty report done on it. And he's going to go, this is just an average Mustang, and Lee Iacocca never saw this car. And the person's going to be upset, and there's going to be fraud and all kinds of stuff. So I want to encourage you guys that when you are out looking at these cars, when you start to hear these kind of stories, man, document them or cast them aside. And do not bid on the car because of hearsay. Because that's all they're doing. You know, they're trying to get some sort of extra money out of it by enlightening the story. Here's the thing that happened to me years ago. And you know I'm a big Power Wagon guy, the early Power Wagons. And this guy comes in and he goes, hey, you know, you're into Power Wagons. He said, I was in a junkyard in this little town in the middle of Tennessee. And he said, there's a Power Wagon there, and the guy wants, you know, $1,000 for it or whatever. And I'm like, well, that's crazy, but let me see the pictures. Well, sure enough, it's like a 53 Power Wagon, all there. The fenders are off the truck, and they're in the bed. but I'm not seeing any rust on this thing. Had the winch on the front, the whole deal. So I'm like, I can't concentrate for the rest of the day. So I get hold of this guy, and he says, yeah, I got the truck here. He said, I've had this thing for 20-some years, and he said, I'm going to go ahead and, maybe put it back together and try to sell it. I said, well, don't touch it right now. I said, I'll be out there tomorrow and look at it. So I drive out there the next day, and sure enough, man, this is a legit deal. There's no rust on the truck. The fenders are in the bed. The bed is not rusted out. It's one of the most solid original style power wagons that I've ever seen. The guy goes, the truck came out of here, and he said, rumor has it that Scotty Moore, the guitar player for Elvis, used to own this truck. And I'm like, is there any documentation for that? He goes, oh, no, I don't have any documentation, but that's what I heard. And I'm like, well, why are you saying that? Because if you can't document it, it's not true. Oh, and it's a funny story because I'll tell you guys, he had it listed for like $1,000. I can't get the money out fast enough, but I didn't have money on me at the time. I said, okay, it's sold. I said, I'll be here tomorrow with the trailer to pick it up. And he goes, yeah, he said, I think I'll maybe bolt the fenders on it and do something with it. I said, okay, but it's sold. So the next day I grab a trailer, I get the money, and I call him up just to make sure. And I said, hey, this is Stacey. I came and looked at the Power Wagon yesterday. I'm coming to pick it up. He said, funny thing about that Power Wagon. And I'm like, no way, no, somebody came and bought it. He said, I went ahead and bolted the fenders on it, put it together. And he said, I got it running. He said, I got it started. He said, I drove it around the yard. Okay, I'm dying now. I'm just dying. He said, yeah. He said, I put a little bit of work into it. He said, I'm going to, I have to have a little more money for it. And I'm thinking, oh, frick. I'm thinking, oh, it's gone up to $3,500, $4,000, $4,500. Okay. I said, what's the damage? Because remember, he had told me $1,000 on it. And he says, yeah, I'm going to have about $1,200 out of it. And I'm like, it is sold. I said, I'm on the way. It is sold. Don't touch it. So I load the trailer up, and out I go, man. And I pull into his yard. And keep in mind, this is a couple hours south of Nashville in a little tiny town. And I pull up, and there it sits in his front yard with a for sale sign on it. So I go out there, and I pay him for it. I get it. Drove it onto the trailer for $1,200. And obviously, that was the one truck that I had gotten over the years where I actually got a pretty good profit out of it. I was in the process of doing Sergeant Rock at the time, so I didn't need another Power Wagon, but man, it was cool. But the point I wanted to get across is the whole Scotty Moore thing. We just cast that aside. But the way to do it, if you want to do that kind of thing, is get hold of the person and document it if you can. For example, I had a situation like that years ago. I don't know if you remember on the show, where I had Richard Petty's 36 Chevy Coupe. At least that's supposedly what it was. I had bought this from a museum down in Talladega, and it had been on display. And it came with a photocopied version of the title back in the 50s that had Lee Petty's name on it. Okay, that's pretty good documentation, but it's not good enough because it was like it's a photocopy. People can fake that kind of junk. And the car had some weird work done to it. So even though I bought it on the supposition that that's what it was, until you can actually document it from the man himself, you don't really have that. And of course, Lee's long gone, but Richard's still around. And I'm friends with Richard, so we get hold of Richard and start telling him about the car. And Richard documents it. He goes, absolutely. He said, I'm the one that spotted that car. He said, Dad drove that for 6 laps at I think it was Talladega or Daytona. It was Daytona, actually, on the beach. I think in 56. He's rattling off this history. And now I know I've got something. Matter of fact, at that point, Richard was like, I want the car back. He said, I'd like to restore it. So we worked out a deal, and Richard has the car now. But unless you do something like that, that kind of speculation, you got to be really careful about that kind of stuff. That brings up the Copperhead saga. I don't know if you guys have been following this, but we talked about it on a podcast a little while ago. There was a replica of Copperhead that went through one of the Mecum auctions, and it was misrepresented. It was represented as the truck I had actually built, which obviously was not true. And of course, the guy that bought it, I've been in touch with him, and he's working things out with Mecum, and they're getting it taken care of. The thing is with that, he had all of this. I mean, it came with this placard that said, it was built by me on the show and all this other kind of stuff. So, and when I talked to him, he said, I thought I was buying the real truck. And he said, I didn't know that much about it. He said, once I bought it, brought it home, my sons looked it up, and they got all excited. But then they realized, like, the motor's different and the seats are different. And as I walked him around it, it's a pretty good replica. They used Corvette seats instead of the aftermarket seats that I used, which were based on Corvette seats. But then there were also a lot of things that were not that good and where they deviated a lot. Of course, the whole engine and drivetrain is different. A good friend of mine owns the jump truck from the Fall Guy TV series. Now, most of the trucks that were used, the hero trucks, like we said, they were just destroyed and gotten rid of. So there's not really any documentation on those like there is on the Chargers that were used in Dukes of Hazzard. But the jump truck, there was actually a jump truck built. And if you watch the opening credits of the Fall Guy, you'll see that truck jump and you see the axle being broken and all this crazy stuff. But if you'll notice, one of the trucks, you see it jumping and you see what looks like an oil pan right under the back of the cab. And that's what they did, is that they relocated the engine back to make the truck where it wouldn't nose over when they jumped it. And they built it with a cage, and it was a complete stunt truck. And this guy has this, and he has the documentation of it, of where he got it from the movie house, the production company. So he's got really the only documented Fall Guy truck from the TV show. And he asked me, he says, hey, I was thinking about restoring it, and putting a nice interior in it and making it like the truck they drove around. And I was like, no, do not touch it. Put some panels or something on the inside, make it livable, but do not alter it from the jump truck, because that's what it is. It's the jump truck. That's where its value is. That's what I wanted to see. I mean, all the old nasty welds, or you can see where they broke stuff. And I mean, that's the magic of that. So as you say, buyer beware. But since the auctions are becoming such a big deal for people now and a big place for people to buy cars, man, just be careful and protect yourself and ask questions and have a good time with the cars out there, guys. One question I get a lot when guys are talking about jobs is about Cornwall Tools. We talk about Cornwall a lot, and you see me use their stuff on the show a lot. People are asking, hey, how do I become a dealer? Man, all you have to do is contact Cornwall, tell them you're interested in becoming a dealer, and you'll be on your way. And it is a great company to work for, and they've been around a long time. You've seen the tools, you've seen the way they operate. They're definitely worth checking out. So if you're sitting there and kind of wondering where your life is going to go and maybe looking for a new career, you may want to look into becoming a Cornwall tool dealer. All right, I got a question here from Brad. Brad says, hey, does an X-pipe improve performance and or sound? Or is it just hype? Good question. For those of you that don't understand what Brad is talking about, the X-pipe or the H-pipe is the exhaust thing that you put on a dual exhaust to connect the two pipes together. And both the H-pipe and the X-pipe do improve performance, and they do sound better. I personally think they do. I can definitely tell the difference. Now, there is a complete argument about which one works the best. Some people say X-pipe, some people say H-pipe. Both have their pros and cons. But yeah, if you can put an X-pipe in, and I usually prefer an X if you can do it, it seems to flow a little better. I would definitely put it in there. You'll pick up a little bit. Now, it's not like you're going to pick up 50 horsepower or something, but it definitely flows better, and you pick up 2 or 3 horsepower with one, depending on how you run the exhaust. But most of these kits come with them now because they realize the value of them. So I'd do it, Brad, definitely. All right, this next question comes from Ken, and Ken asks a really legit question here. He says, should an 87 C10 have a VIN tag on the door? That's a really good question. We've actually kind of covered that on some of the show recently. The question really isn't about an 87 C10. It's about any vehicle. And the answer real quick, Ken, is yeah, it could. There could be a door tag on it that has the VIN listed on it. That's very common. However, that is not the official VIN tag because doors can be removed. Doors can be swapped. So one of the things to remember is anything on a car that can be removed, like a glove box door, a fender, a deck lid, a hood, that's not where the factory will put a permanent VIN tag. Now, like I said, most vehicles have a door tag that, if you open it up, it'll give like the axle ratio and some of the specs about the vehicle. And a lot of times it has the VIN tag listed on there as well. But that VIN tag will be permanently stamped somewhere else on the vehicle. And that's the one that people go to if the vehicle gets stolen or if you run it through an auction or whatever. So the place to look on that C10 is up on the dash. Right there, if you look down through the windshield, that's usually where GM puts them. Or they might be on the inner door, the post, not the door itself, but the inner post, the A-pillar as it goes down, the permanent part of the body. So that's where to look for that. I had a Ford, and Ford was bad about this. They would put the tags on the doors. And I had a truck that I actually sold that was a 78, but it had a door from a 76 on it. And so it had the VIN tag from the 76 on that door tag. So the truck actually had 2 VIN tags on it. One matched the title, which was the tag that was permanent mounted, stamped on the dash up there. But then it also had another tag that said VIN on it because somebody had swapped a door. Now that can be really confusing because sometimes you'll get a policeman that'll come out that won't know that. They'll open the door and they'll look at that and they'll go, "Oh, your VIN tags don't match. This truck's stolen." So now you got some explaining to do. So just bear that in mind, and especially if you're building a kit car or anything where you're getting ready to put a new VIN tag, if you've applied for a lost title and you're getting a new VIN tag put on something, it has to go to a permanent place. And usually the cops that come out and put it on know all about that stuff. Just make sure that it goes someplace that cannot be replaced and moved. And you'll be good to go. Hope that answers your question. All right, that wraps it up for us today. Get out there and work on something. Spend some time turning some wrenches. And if you need some wrenches, make sure you check out Cornwall. They got all kinds of stuff to make your life easier in the shop.